Yeah, so as was introduced, I'm presenting on green infrastructure planning and ecosystem health as an opportunity for communities to increase their, essentially their adaptive capacity in the face of climate change. So I work for ACT. ACT is an organization at Simon Fraser University who focuses or is a leader in bringing experts from a variety of different fields together to come to develop ideas and distribute and direct recommendations to governments or private industry. And so one of the big questions that ACT is looking at right now, also in partnership with Bridget Doyle, the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, and as well as economists, lawyers, city planners, municipal staff from around the South Coast, is how can communities of all shapes and sizes use green infrastructure to benefit regional ecosystem health in a changing climate? So again, so this is an ongoing project that we're working on. So this is really the first time that we've put together the ideas in one, or I guess in a collection of 15 slides. So I've broken it down into 3 parts. So we're gonna look at what we're talking about when we say indicators of ecosystem health, as well as sort of the biodiversity crisis caused by climate change. Part 2, so looking at green infrastructure as a climate change adaptation approach, and then components of well-designed green infrastructure. And then I'm gonna finish with looking at how do we integrate those 2 approaches, and what are the co-benefits of an integrated climate adaptation approach. And then hopefully if I speak fast enough, I'll have enough time to get through 2 examples of a green infrastructure approach that considered ecosystem health. So one of them being a rehabilitated ecosystem, and one of them an engineered. So I think that a lot of these indicators have been covered in various discussions throughout the day, but I think these 4 offer arguably probably an incomplete analysis of what a healthy ecosystem looks like, but I think it sets a good framework. So looking at the physiochemical indicators, so water quality, soil quality, whether or not there are chemicals in the soil from urban environments, herbicides, pesticides, or agriculture and stuff like that. So the biological indicators, looking at the types and the amount of species that are living within the ecosystem. The habitat indicators, so looking at sort of the quality of the system for species to live in. Is there erosion or degradation to the soil? What does the riparian area look like? And 4th, the flow indicators. So what is the ability for water and other species to work their way through the ecosystem as they feel, as they need to. And so ecosystems are under a lot of pressure due to climate change. I think that has become pretty clear throughout the day. But so right now, just to mention, we're in a time that's being called by scientists to be the 6th mass extinction. So for the past roughly 100 years, we've seen an increase in the rate of extinction for species at a regional scale across the world. We're also looking at, there's sort of a disruption to ecosystem flows and species migration, as well as climate change-induced species migration. So whether that's forests being decimated by forest fire or coastal erosion after major storms, species are having more and more of a difficult time to move between ecosystems that they need to survive. And then on top of that, the urban context, urban and industrial expansion is continuing into already sensitive ecosystems. So I don't know if you can see, but that sort of dizzying map on the side is sort of a visual representation of the way that species are flowing or that are being forced in a north and upward motion across all of North America to higher latitudes and higher elevations due to climate change. So there has been both global and local responses to what's being called the biodiversity crisis, and this isn't an exhaustive list or anything. I just thought it was important to bring to the attention. There are resources out there that sort of help to, would help a city planner or a community organizer look for information on what are some of the solutions or some of the targets that are being created for the biodiversity crisis. So the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, which focuses mostly on sort of the human impact of the loss of ecosystems, the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity and the Aichi targets. So these were a general framework developed by the United Nations to help United Nations member parties develop their own country-based outcomes framework. So sort of in response to that, the Canadian government revamped their 2006 Biodiversity Outcomes Framework to be the 2016 Biodiversity Outcomes Framework, which includes now 1 out of 19 targets that identifies climate adaptation as a key component. So target 5, that by 2020 the ability of Canadian ecological systems to adapt to climate change is better understood and priority adaptation measures are underway. So aside from maybe some vague wording, at least it's in there now. And finally, I think the Surrey Biodiversity Conservation Strategy is a good example of something that's been adopted throughout different municipal sort of plans and strategies within Surrey. Okay, so now that I've sort of introduced sort of what the ecosystem and the ecosystem health component of our project is, now we're looking to integrate that with what's being adopted sort of widespread across the world really as a potential adaptation approach is a green infrastructure. So green infrastructure is essentially the natural vegetation that allows, so the natural vegetation like soils, water, and potentially bioengineered solutions that provide society with a broad array of products and services for healthy living. And so these can range in size from anywhere, as you can see on the image to the right, or sorry, to the left, anywhere from sort of entire grasslands, wetlands, forests, to much smaller scale and sort of easier for communities to implement or design, so street trees, rain gardens, green roofs, bioswales, rain gardens. Yeah. And so green infrastructure as an approach really helps with communities to develop strategies that enhance the ability for ecosystems within an urban environment to provide these ecosystem services that have also been introduced today. So these services are those that all species rely on, including water filtration, providing pollinator species habitat, to regulating air quality and stormwater, which is increasingly important in especially the South Coast area. So unfortunately, I live in Vancouver, so if anybody here is a municipal staff of the city of Vancouver, I'm not singling you out for having not good green infrastructure, but this is just what I see where I live and where I work. And for lack of a better title and lack of creativity, I wouldn't say that any of this is bad green infrastructure, but it's just not good. So on the far side, you see there's a nice little garden area that was built on, I guess, sort of the north end of the convention center just across the water, where if you can kind of see that black blob in the bottom is actually a goose that made its home there. But if you consider the actual ecosystem that goose might rely on, it's going to have to cross over a cruise ship to access the nearest water source. So that connectivity wasn't considered. And then in the middle is just some street trees where you can see how the impact of how close that pavement and those sidewalks are to the base of that tree, and how little grass space there actually is. It's really difficult for water to actually infiltrate that soil and be absorbed. And then the final picture, I think it might actually be one of my favorite trees in Vancouver, because it shows just how resilient nature can be to literal like constriction from the urban environment. You can see, so there's really just a cement ring around the base of that tree and cutting off almost complete access to the soil that it needs to survive. And somehow, I'm assuming it's a real tree, but somehow it's found a way to live and grow quite large. So maybe it's a little unfair, but I think all of these do provide some level of sort of ecosystem service or allow for a habitat for different species. But generally, the larger network that these types of projects could potentially have, or the impact could be a lot greater. And so developing green infrastructure and green infrastructure that considers ecosystem health doesn't, the benefits don't stop at just sort of stormwater management or creating habitats for other species, pollinator species. Depending on the size, they can have a considerable effect on carbon sequestration. They are cheaper actually in the end to implement and to maintain than more traditional gray infrastructure projects. There's the social impact, so communities, I think, become a lot more nicer and healthier places to live as you increase the green space. As well, they connect people to the nature and the natural systems that we rely on. And because of the way that you can implement them, they can offer a great opportunity to engage with public participation in, again, the maintenance and replacement of these projects. And on the right, is something that was recently published by the United Nations, I think kind of last week, so I haven't had a lot of time to really look into this. But it's how an individual wetland can support the achievements of all 17 Sustainable Development Goals. But I think going into all of that would probably be a 15-minute presentation in itself. So that's just sort of a resource that might be of interest to people. And then so green infrastructure planning within the South Coast area, again, so this is just a list of resources that might be of interest to you if you want to look into further. So there's the Metro Vancouver Connecting the Dots, so that helps advise if you're interested in developing green infrastructure links towards or between existing large green spaces, so to enhance that connectivity. The Metro Vancouver Integrated Stormwater Management Plan, and then from that, the Vancouver Rain City Strategy, as well as the Musqueam Integrated Stormwater Management Plan. And again, in the South Coast area, there are examples of official community plans that emphasize green infrastructure, as well as some comprehensive community plans, such as the Tsleil-Waututh Nation's official land use plan within their Anticipating the Future chapter. Right, and so because I'm running out of time, one of the examples that I think is really exciting and interesting for people to look at, or to maybe look further into, is the Still Creek Watershed. So the Still Creek Watershed borders Vancouver and Burnaby, and long story short, streams and creeks within Vancouver had been culverted, shoved underground, and basically channelized to dump stormwater straight into creeks. And so the Still Creek Watershed rehabilitation project worked to daylight those streams and rehabilitate sort of those natural areas around the stream. So you can see on the bottom right is Renfrew Ravine, which was rehabilitated to look and act and function more like a healthy ecosystem. And I believe the first salmon returned to spawn in Still Creek in 2012 and have for 4 of the past 5 years. So by considering green infrastructure and ecosystem health, you can have a rebound in a species such as the salmon. And the Kanaka Creek Watershed Stewardship Center offers another really exciting example of how you can build using green infrastructure concepts and reduce the impacts that building development has on the natural area by considering the watershed that it's building in. So the Kanaka Creek the whole campus area uses a roof to creek concept where the rain that falls on the area isn't channelized and basically shoved straight back into the creek, but it's slowed down. It replenishes a natural pond. The water's filtered through the use of native species, and then slowly integrates itself back into the Kanaka Creek, which is also located next to a salmon hatchery. So they've noticed that there's been considerable increase in the water quality with projects like this. So my concluding thoughts, and I think this is something that's being talked about throughout the day, is that climate change adaptation is really going to require a multidisciplinary approach. And so one opportunity here is using green infrastructure and biodiversity and engaging with different knowledge holders and developing plans that are unique and place-specific are really going to increase the adaptive capacity of communities, and then as well as the co-benefits that I went through. So just like to finish by saying thank you very much again. This was a huge honor. And if you're interested in continuing this conversation, ACT is going to be hosting a workshop probably late in the fall. So if you are interested in being involved, participating or anything like that, feel free to send me an email, or ACT is on Twitter. I check it too much. So I'll probably get back to you faster if you tweet at me, because that's exciting. But yeah, thank you very much for having me.